Well, I just go into my SharePoint.
So
The recording has started, so
Yeah.
someone's recording it. Someone's recording it. That's good. Okay.
Great. So we're gathered here today to have a sort of content preparation discussion on the accessible information panel that is being convened by, well, Tim, it was your handiwork, and so the UK Association of Accessible Formats under that umbrella. Tim, you're looking. Oh, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
Yes, absolutely. Now I remember it's my idea. I want to take full responsibility for it. It's a brilliant, an utterly brilliant idea that's now finally being executed to the high standards I expect.
Fantastic. So we weren't 100% sure who was chairing the panel, whether it was Roger. I don't know if that's been discussed or agreed, or Tim, if you are, but whoever thinks they are, could we start off by sort of talking about what content we want the panel discussion to cover, and then we can think about some questions that we might arrange in advance. So we've got a list of suggested questions from you, Tim.
Yeah. So I think I'd originally envisaged Roger as a participant, so I could give Roger a hard time, which is always enjoyable. But
that's fine.
So we haven't actually nominated officially, but I'm very happy to step up to be the host for this session.
Okay, great. So that's good news, and maybe we can do some brief introductions, because I'm not sure if everybody knows everybody.
That sounds like an excellent idea. Roger, do you want to begin?
Okay, I'm not quite sure what. No. Okay. At the last few months, I've been I'm chair of UK Association for Accessible Formats, and the day job is, or the other job is, what to do for my living, as it were, transcribing music into Braille from print for people. So music and all these other things are all very interesting.
Cool.
Thanks, Roger.
Next, I think we've got Richard.
Richard, you're on mute.
I think he's.
What about go to Cassandra then, and then come back?
We've got Richard.
I'll go. So. Do you hear Richard now?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so hopefully I'll find a service station in a second. So I'm travelling at the moment, so apologies if there's lots of road noise. So Richard Orme, I'm working at Chief Executive at the DAISY Consortium, which is an international non-profit. It's focused all on access to information for people with various print disabilities. Quite a big focus on access to library and publishing material. And I previously have worked for Dolphin Computer Access, but spent most of my career working for the Royal National Institute of Blind People.
Thanks, Richard.
Excellent. And we don't have Duff with us, Duff Johnson?
No.
Okay. No. And I guess that leaves Hector Minto.
No, it's Cassandra from Microsoft.
I do apologise. Cassandra.
No worries at all. I'm driving as well, so apologies for the noise on the background. My name is Cassandra Marrero, and I'm the Microsoft Teams Product Marketing Manager in the UK, and also lead the UK Accessibility Champions Network.
Fabulous. And I am Tim Nelms. I'm a board member of UCAP, the UK Association for Accessible Formats. I'm also the chair of the PDF Association in the UK. And for my day job, I'm VP International for a company called Crawford Technologies, who are heavily involved in accessible information, mainly around PDF. So that is everybody. Duff Johnson, who isn't with us today, is the Chief Executive of the PDF Association. The PDF Association is a global organization and the custodian of standards for PDF. And included within that remit is accessible PDF, which is an enhancement of the PDF standard that allows it to retain information that can be used with accessible technologies like screen readers.
Mm-hmm. Great. So
let me start by just giving the idea for this, maybe just setting the scene in terms of the idea for the panel session. So one of the things that we proposed a number of things as UCAF, and what we wanted to do was to really promote an understanding of accessible information as part of the TechShare event. And there are a number of things happening around that as part of the 3 days. So in particular, UCAF are hosting some dedicated what we call lunch and learn sessions, which are anywhere between 15 minutes and half an hour, and are focused on key standards for accessible information. And remembering that UCAF has quite a broad remit, so we cover what we would call the traditional accessible formats like Braille, large print and audio, but also digital standards like EPUB, PDF, Office documents, and accessible images. And the intent is to try and give people a really broad understanding of all of those subjects and standards. And so we're both introducing those standards with an introductory session, but then also providing 15-minute introduction to sessions that will go into a reasonable amount of detail, certainly enough detail for people to be able to assess whether those are standards that are of interest to them and whether they want to pursue those further and to find out more. So those sessions are going to be going on over the course of the 3 days, and that's kind of supporting material for this session. The second thing that UCAF are doing is we're hosting a panel session, which is designed as a drop-in session for anybody interested in accessible information. And the idea behind that is that we will be offering our expertise. There will be experts on all of those subject areas in that meeting. And we're going to be having a discussion in that session on some of the more technical nuances related to choices of standards. And so that will be very much led by the audience, and that's anticipated to be about 45 minutes long. So those are the other sessions that are going on. This final session was designed to bring together some of the key protagonists and participants in the kind of accessible information standards spaces. And so we designed this session to include representatives from bodies that represent the standards. So that is obviously Richard Orme with DAISY, the PDF Association with DUF. Roger here is representing UCAF and Braille and perhaps other standards as well. And of course, we have Microsoft, who in this kind of scenario are representing Office document formats. And the idea was to really provide a forum to brief people on what all of those options are that are available to them, you know, what the organization's different views are on accessible information and the accessibility of their formats, and also ask some open questions about what we're seeing or what those organizations are seeing in the market around the demand and need for digital accessibility, particularly across North America and Europe. So that's the idea behind the session, is to try and drive that conversation amongst the participants and end up at the end of it with some forward-looking questions and statements about what do we think the market is going to look like in 10 years' time. So we'll take a little bit of a snapshot around what do we think the market looks like at the moment in terms of penetration of accessible formats and information, and then, you know, what do we think that will look like in the future. So I hope that's enough of a brief on the session. Are there any questions on that?
Tim, that was really helpful. Thank you. It just made me wonder whether one of the goals here could be the publication of something, just as much as, because you mentioned the discussion and the engagement in the room, but that actually sounds like something that could be a paper or a blog or something that's a an artifact of the conversation or discussion. Would that be a particular thing to get out the other end as well? And if so, I'm just thinking about where that might be published or shared.
I think that's a really nice outcome, and I think we'd be very happy as UCAF to commit to that.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly, obviously with TechShare Pro, man, we can be the base for sharing that out, but and helps think about who the audience is as well, doesn't it? And then if it was going to be published here, then this is the type of conversation we'd have, and it goes both ways. It draws people in to discuss what's going to be published, and also it's a place that the audience is then going to see it as a product afterwards.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I think that's a really nice idea to have a takeaway.
Yeah, I agree. And UCAF, we could certainly assist with that and push it out to channels we have, and to our membership as well. So it is going to be a practical outcome.
Yeah. I certainly that certainly helps me understand, in the sense of the nature of the conversation. Where are we going to be in 10 years' time in relation to this particular question? It's huge, isn't it?
Oh, it's massive.
It's a bit
it's
like trying to put some
massive.
wrap around that and say, with this particular thing in mind. I was just trying to get my head around where's that going to go. It's so sprawling. If
I mean, Mark, I think it is, but I think what we can flag up are the really practical things along the way that we can, and I'm not saying this was, we can talk about these things and recognise what major players in the market are actually doing, and fantastic job that is. But we know alongside that there are just huge areas out there where people might want to do something about accessibility and usability, and it just bang right down to the bottom of the list for a whole variety of reasons. So if you look at the world overall, where we've got masses to do, there's a great mountain to climb. Doesn't mean it's not impossible, but I think it's really important we don't run off with the idea that we're doing very nicely and it's all going to fall into place and happen, and we haven't got to do much about it.
I think that's a good premise to start with, actually, Roger. I think you're right. That would be very helpful. Yeah. What I envisaged was this session really being a chance for key exponents from the technology side of things to be talking about their views on this, because I think the PDF Association would have one view, but would also be very supportive of other standards and technologies that are out there, because they have a particularly nuanced view, which is driven from the world of paper, which they're in. The Richard Orme, I have no doubt, has a particularly based on the fact that DAISY is widely adopted in publishing and books and magazines, and where he might foresee that going. So I think it's going to be really interesting to examine that and peel a few layers on that.
And the publishers are doing a fantastic job within their own, within their own things as well. So there's a lot of good stuff going on. But as you say, what the next 10 years is going to look like, that's a real challenge.
If I'm really honest, I imagined this as kind of a wrestling match where we'd have 5 corners, then all the standards people would jump into the middle, and we'd see who would win at the end of it. But I don't think that's going to work as a remote event. So instead we'll just have to make it a conversation between those people.
I think what we can do is, another really important outcome is that if we can somehow engage those in a really meaningful and practical way who want to do things, but who find it for whatever reason that they can't, even though they want to, if there are ways of making that road easier, by maybe from your larger companies, the Microsofts or whoever of the world have done things, and people might think, oh well, it's all very well for corporates to do it, and corporates might think, well, smaller enterprises should have a much better opportunity in terms of perhaps not being as large, but so it's all things really, isn't it? And there's no one way of doing it.
So this is Richard. So I think it would be great if we're not talking a lot about standards, but we're talking about solutions, because I think people aren't going to be so interested in hearing lots of acronyms and things. They'll want to know what they as professionals in their own businesses could be doing, or whether or not they're doing the right kind of thing. And that's probably less about the very latest standard stuff, more about, you know, the way that people are finding solutions, serving their customers, and the way that end users are kind of consuming accessible content. So I would never pitch this as kind of four corners and having a battle, because I think that's interesting only to people who are interested specifically in standards. Most people are probably more interested in what do these technologies actually bring in an everyday way to people. And one way of phrasing that is kind of maybe exploring some domains like the world of education, the world of employment, you know, daily living, those sorts of things. So is that kind of, does that work, Tim, in your formulation, or is that in conflict with it?
No, I think that works very well. You know, clearly I'm being facetious. We don't want this to be a battle. I think everybody is very supportive of you know, accessibility in its broadest sense. The questions that we had lined up were these. So we had, first of all, an introduce your organization and state your commitments to accessible information. So I think that's a good chance to hear from everybody about what their interest is in the market. We then had a question about adoption rates. You know, what adoption rates does your organization see for, and in particular, we've asked a question about digital accessibility in North America and Europe. We've got, what is preventing organizations from delivering accessible information? What are your predictions for accessible information in 10 years' time? And then, are digital accessible formats taking over from traditional alternate formats, or are they living happily side by side? So that's what we had at the moment as questions. But I think something on solutions would be good. I guess what I might say there, Richard, is maybe we could direct that as, where do you see your standards being most heavily used, in which markets, for what kind of purposes? Would that help drive that out of the conversation?
I guess it's just not the way I would approach it. I would be kind of talking amongst the brains trust that's there on the panel, saying what do we perceive to be the key issues in relation to access to information, say within the world of work. How does this prevent people with print disabilities gaining, securing work and moving on? What are the options out there, and how do we see this coming? So rather than, you know, a PDF association view and a DAISY consortium view and a Microsoft view, I think we have more of a generic discussion about that. And of course we can bring different solutions in there, but I think that probably would land better with the audience, I think, rather, you know, that would be my take. So,
I would agree with you. I would agree with you, Richard, because, you know, there are things that crop up every year within education. I'm not going to say, you know, and I just, you know, we both know, and these are the really kind of nitty gritty. That's where it's at for people who are in that boat, as it were. And we could talk about, you know, the next 10 years in terms of what other things, but I mean, there's no reason, of course we can put the two together, but it does need to be where people are at in their daily lives, be it providing information, using information, accessing information, whatever it is. And, you know, I say that's part of, we know there's a long way to go still.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I am very open to all the ideas being put forward here.
Yeah.
So
Tim,
like
would
that.
you be able to circulate your questions just so, you know, separately to this, just so, for instance, for myself, so that I've just got a copy of those things that you outlined?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you.
I think you probably already have them, but I will resend.
No, it'd just be helpful
what about the audience? What the audience that will be there? What will they be hoping for? What will be most beneficial for them? So are they professionals from service industry? Indeed, will there be representation from the world of education? Or can we save time by skipping that out because the audience won't be there? What do the TechShare Pro organisers say on this?
I think it's a really good question, Richard. I think you've got a challenge in a sense that the plain problem with this is we've got to put an attractive wrapper on the outside to get anybody to turn up. It's one of the things we're learning this year about a virtual event is that when you do face-to-face stuff that we've done for the last 3 years, you can slot in this sort of conversation and somebody will find their place within it because they're already in the room and they've already committed to 2 days at a conference. I think what we've got to think here is which audience are you looking for? Be very clear about which one you're expecting and naming them almost in the description and the introduction, even if the discussion then can wend its way off in other directions. So I'm actually quite interested to see what Cassandra's got to say, because it seems that we're gonna get Microsoft as probably the only tech supplier. We have talked to others, and there may be others that come in, but it may be that if you said, what does Microsoft think that accessible documentation will look like in 10 years' time, is a really different conversation to how shall we organize all the bodies that are interested in accessible formats, which is if you're in danger of ending up at the other end of the scale, aren't you? One of them is going to draw people in to say, what does accessible documentation look like in 10 years' time? I reckon that's going to draw a particular audience in that links to TechShare Pro. So I don't know. That was just a thought about how you label it as much as who's actually naturally going to turn up.
I 100% agree with you, Mark. And I was just waiting to kind of jumping into that, because obviously it's two very different spectrums of the balance in that one in terms of how the conversation will go. And obviously we can add quite a lot of into the conversation, as you say, as to, where we see in the trends, where we see in ourselves going in the future, what's the vision in 10 years time, where do we see this kind of going? But it's very different to actually starting to talking about the technical nuances of the different standards and what we choose and what we not. So I think from my point of view, it'd be super good to actually understand and have clarity on what it is that we're actually trying to drive out of the session, just to make sure that I am the right person to actually support as well the conversation.
Yeah.
So Mark, what about this? Why don't we focus this on the future of accessible information? That seems to be the theme I'm hearing.
Yeah, I agree. And to be honest, as an outsider to the discussion around formats and an insider on I've been to 3 TechShare Pros. I'd need a guide to help me understand that starts to sound more complex than my own universe, if you know what I mean. My bit of work that I'm looking at and thinking, okay, I've got to do some stuff around accessibility. I've got to understand where the future is. How does the formats argument impact on what I do? Maybe a little bit more, as Richard was saying, or perhaps as you were hinting at, Roger, in education, to what extent is this something that the education establishments are going to have anything to do with in particular, or is it maybe more about a technical conversation where they're going to have to adopt standards in the future? What's the impact of these sorts of things going to be back at base? So on the one hand, you've got Microsoft saying, well, we see documentation going in this direction. We see accessible formats and information, whatever that is. And then me thinking, okay, what's that going to do with me thinking about how I change my work in AbilityNet, in a university, and then in between, I'm guessing is where the formats and the standardization comes from, isn't it? That's the crunchy bit to make it all happen. That's the picture I've got at the moment of the connection between the things. And the audience, I think, is more like me, but needs to know that UCAF and others are out there doing stuff and how we can engage with that and what that means in terms of the decisions we make. And then the stuff that Cassandra, or if it was, the PDF, maybe another one as well, is saying, well, look, this is the direction we see these formats going. These are the things that we're publishing now, and this is the stuff that we're making happen. That's the glue in there, isn't it, really? That, but in 10 years' time, .docx will have taken over the planet. We won't need any other format. That might be, if it had something like that, you go, oh, okay, so I sort of get what the implications of that are. Do I want it? How do I stop it? That's a different thing, isn't it? I'm just beginning to try and think. There's also, I'm aware that having seen what you're doing with the bite-sized stuff, that this actually covers a huge range of documents, formats, and you've done a really nice job of introducing me to stuff I hadn't really thought about before. So I wonder whether people need to have a little bit of that slope up as well. It's not just learning about PDF and a doc and the choice between the two when you publish it. There's a whole nother big layer to it from what you're beginning to see here. So as much as anything, you end up having educated them rather than engaged them in the discussion, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to answer Richard's the question really about who might be in there. I think there's more people in my shoes, I think, listening to what you're saying, thinking, what's it got to do with me? As there are people saying, oh yeah, we really need to go back to that decision we made 2 years ago about this thing when we were doing this on the policy board, and now we need to look again at this particular thing. Or I can't guess what that might look like, but
and also that the the people who are really at the cutting edge of standards are able to take on board the good ideas that could come back from people who are, or the needs of those people, people as it were in that audience, Mark, that you're saying.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's a question. Maybe, and it is stretching me a bit because it's one of multiple sessions that I don't even know. I can't participate in myself, if you know what I mean. This isn't a topic I could even think about sharing. So I think maybe it's a question of who's setting standards and where they come from, and what I can do to influence that. I guess there's that type of question, isn't it? As you say, how much is Microsoft listening to users in the sense of setting standards, and how much is it reflecting that back
or just practically use products, for instance? These are really practical things, and I'm not going to I could easily say at the moment, but I won't, because it would be nice if that came from the audience.
And I think the audience will be asking questions to try and establish what this conversation's about. That's an obvious thing, and what you've just suggested there gives it a sort of starting point. And maybe the questions that we're looking at, that you've got on your prep here, Tim, just have to be, the question from me would be about how this would impact upon my use of tools. Are there going to be new standards emerging that I need to know about? Is that likely to happen, or are we really talking about consolidation and choosing standards that within that we're familiar with already, and really adopting those and saying, right, we need to champion this. This is, we need to consolidate and clarify and simplify. So therefore we need to make some choices, and that's as a user as well as a producer of the information. I mean, from looking at it from my point of view, that's the sort of stuff I can see that I would then think, okay, I've got to begin thinking about what we're doing with our tools in the future. Those are the sorts of things I can throw in. I'm really interested in the take up of the different formats as well. That's the other bit I was going to mention. I think the data giving me a perspective on how people are actually consuming information from the end of the, both, I mean, clearly Microsoft are going to be able to tell us some stuff around that, and the UCAF, I'm assuming, is the sort of data you're talking about, Tim, about the usage of particular formats and so on. There's just a simple education thing that for me, going away, I didn't realize that many people use that format. I'll take an example, Braille. To what extent is Braille penetrated into particular education, workplace, home, whatever? I don't know. I think that's the sort of thing you were saying as well, wasn't it?
It was. We have some data and statistics about that we can share, but it would be interesting to get a view of the panel. Yeah. I think I'm starting to get a stronger feel. What I just put up on the screen here so that people know the questions that we've discussed here, and I've tried to reflect the conversation in that list. Roger, I will send you that list.
Brilliant.
If you'd like. I can read that out.
No, just send it to me, Tim. That'll be brilliant, because that'll help me enormously. That'll be great.
So I've just been writing notes as we're going along, but Mark, does that reflect what we've been talking about here, do you think?
Yeah, I'm starting to get a sense of what over the course of the 45 minutes, if I'm checking with Cassandra again, because I think I'm guessing that what Microsoft can tell us is stuff to do with what people are currently doing, how people are currently producing information, and your tools are increasing.
Producing and consuming, yeah. What I would say, Mark, though, if I may.
Things like usage of the accessibility checker will be in here somewhere, I guess, the extent to which people are actually adopting mainstream tools that have capabilities that therefore produce more accessible information, as well as consuming more information. I'm guessing stuff like that is in your bit.
Sorry, Cassandra, you were going to say something?
Sorry, it keeps on breaking up, so I keep on cutting on people. Yes, absolutely. I think it is about how we develop, create, and consume information that we can add to that. I would say, Mark, and I was just thinking Hector as well. I think it may be worth a follow-up between you, Hector, and me, maybe sometime this week, just to kind of think on what we want to kind of convey, and what input do we put from Microsoft into this theme.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm aware as well that that's probably something that circulated and ended up with you joining in this conversation, and it could have been somebody else, and it could have been with the questions that we have there now, Tim. It may be that that may be true, that we've skewed it one way as well. So I think the questions look interesting. I think answering Richard's questions about who's in the room, I do tend to think it will be more of my non-expert accessibility interest rather than standards-based technical interest, and therefore there's an education piece here just as much as there is a debate and a wrestling match. Not that could.
Mark, will it be from the education sector there, or is it mainly the professional world, business, employers?
Most of the tickets that we've had take up on so far have been not-for-profit, which for us probably means around HE and not education, because that's who we tend to connect with on this. And then the for-profit is very incredibly varied. It's just lots of different organisations, digital accessibility people. Yeah.
So I thought you said HE, not education, but you didn't. You said something else, not education.
No, I said HE. So we as AbilityNet, we don't work very closely with any in terms of the sectors we work with. It's principally HE, and mainly around the public sector regulations. Mainly around. Sorry.
You're saying higher education.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's okay. That gives us something to work with. So you're expecting a significant higher education. When I say significant, it's worth spending time talking about topics which are of interest to people from higher education.
Yes, I think so, and I think that that does give it a frame. Specifically when you're talking about at work, at home, in education, or any of the settings like that, then I think in higher education, enabling people to have inclusive access to higher education, those are the problems we help people solve. And this seems to fit into that, doesn't it, in that sense? So
really helpful. I think as well as identifying questions, we might want to identify themes we're expecting to embellish during our conversation. So changes in consumers' expectations would include, for example, from my analysis, increasingly people looking to use mobile devices to access information, not only kind of traditional computing devices. Very much a big trend in terms of accessible information not being the preserve of an alt format department, for example, within a university, looking for more born accessible content, whether that's come from faculty with, say, a lecturer who's producing content using, for example, Microsoft tools, expecting that content to be accessible, or coming from a publisher as accessible content rather than having to go somewhere and be remediated. And then also I think something around skills. So the skills of people who are producing information, how do they know about what they're supposed to do? But also critically the skills, digital skills, people's knowledge of their own assistive technologies in order to be able to make the best of digital information, accessible information. How do they know how to navigate a table or navigate a math expression or, move around a well-structured document? So I think some of these themes, capturing those so we're prepped, develop these as conversation pieces might mean that we've got a more coherent conversation to have for our attendees.
Agreed. Frankly, Richard, this is the first time we've discussed it since we proposed this, so I was less prepared for this session than in my brain that I imagined. So I think the conversation we've had today will help me formulate that a little bit better. What I think I'll do is put together more of a brief on this, just to help everybody on the call here. So let me do that and circulate that, including both questions we've discussed some themes, and I like the one you've had there, so I've made a note of those. And let's try and tighten this up and see if we can get something that everybody's happy with.
Okay,
That's
Tim,
really helpful, Tim.
yeah,
Can I just mention
I'm going.
something?
Sorry, I'm going to have to dip out at this point. I've stayed a little longer than I originally intended, but I really have to go. So please accept my apologies.
Thank you, Richard.
Roger.
Roger.
I was just going to add Roger's point actually to the themes about the ways that consumers are able to control it, which you know, the expectations thing is actually about the fact that we can choose what format we get content in, perhaps more than we could before. That's a question to maybe, where he was saying, you know, how much do the users decide this and how much is it decided by the supplier? So how much of what we consume and the way we consume it is decided by Microsoft, and how much is it decided by us? Where's the user choice in that? Maybe part of the question as well around formats, that we have a preference, not just a requirement, if you like. And the other thing I was going to mention, Tim, to you, because I think it would be useful just to formulate with these questions in mind, these would work as well in those other two sessions you've mentioned as potential themes. We know that mobile is a topic that we're going to pick up on. We know preferences, customer preferences and expectations is something. So maybe just looking at this session, you know, in isolation, would pick up on some of the themes that are in here, and then others are being picked up in some of the others as well. So you can make sense of the connection between all of them.
Yeah, understood.
Not trying to cover everything in every session, I guess, is the point. These are interesting themes, but they're universal. So
agreed. For the lunch and learn sessions, I'm a little bit limited there because those are mostly in the can now.
Yeah, no. I think those are good. I really like what they offer. I think the discussion piece and the panel discussion clearly leads to these sorts of questions. You know, how are customer expectations changing? How are we seeing that being manifest in the financial services area? You know, how do we keep people safe in terms of the receipt of information, and they feel that they trust the information they're receiving when they're looking it up on their phone? You know, they're all part of that mix of this the themes that we've got that Richard's pulled out here.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm happy if you're able to draft some notes. I'm happy to have a quick chat about that, because I can see them linking across other things we're doing.
Okay.
This isn't just a one point that we're going to try and answer all of these questions, and then maybe we can go back and say this is a chance for you to join in this discussion about these two themes or these particular points that will be of most relevant to the audience. We're going to be focusing on what happens in the next 10 years and what you think users are looking for, or something like that. So you're drawing the audience into that conversation. You've got everything teed up, you know who's going to say what, but you know, the reason I'm here is because I've got an opinion about the question they're asking.
Okay.
That might be a way of making that a little bit more active and engaging.
Okay, understood. Tell me, in terms of the process from here, do we do a dry run, or is there a chance to rehearse in any way, or do we not do that on these kinds of sessions?
We can do that. I think possibly in other cases we would have been further along than it might have been today. But I think given this one, and I think also with the other two that we have, it might be worth just checking in with you to look at what we're doing on those others, just to go through that process across the three.
Yeah.
Because it ties together across the information format and the financial stuff.
Yeah,
Catherine,
sorry.
do we have a rehearsal booked for this group specifically?
Well, this was the
That's
sort of
what I
content preparation session, so
Yeah.
it's not going to be a kind of formal rehearsal, because we want it to be quite sort of natural and so on. So if you felt you needed another session, then we can arrange that. But
that's fine. I think maybe what it just requires is a bit more preparation on my part. I was a little bit when I looked at the subject matter of this today, I went, oh, that's what it's about. So in consequence, I probably wasn't as up to speed on this as I should have been. What I'll do, let me do some more work on this, and I'll let you know, Catherine, whether we need another session before the event. And I might also go around the loop with Richard again, just to get his good input to this.
Okay.
There is something else I would just mention, Catherine, which is the technical rehearsal.
Okay.
Sorry, Richard.
Did you finish?
Yeah, sorry.
So Tim, I have more bandwidth from Thursday on. A reflection is, I wonder whether if we try and make this too generic, we won't really serve any audience. So maybe we need to pick a couple of segments and call them out early on. Say we're focusing on maybe higher ed and, I don't know, access to financial information or something like that. Otherwise, we could be so high level, it kind of doesn't really do anything for anyone. And we should also challenge ourselves to make sure that we can be crystal with maybe here are some takeaways that you can go away and learn about or put into practice or something like that. So that it isn't just a waffly session that we find interesting, but it kind of ties together some of the other sessions that are at TechShare Pro. People can hear some, discussion around it and a bit of thinking about what the future holds, but also maybe some practical, go away and look at this, or sign up for this, or try this out, or something like that. So I'm there, Tim, for you to be exchanging emails, and let's see if we can. I don't think our problem is that we haven't got good content. It'll be about knocking it into shape.
Agreed. Yeah. I think just on that subject to being more specific, one of the things I think we need to remember is that this will, in all probability, be available online. So I'm loath to make it too kind of industry sector specific, because I think it has broad applicability. So I think that's one area where I would like to keep this cross-industry, if you like. Not that we can't mention industries and industries where accessible information is being very successful, but I think that's part of showing people best practice. Whereas the adoption curve good, and where is the adoption curve weak, and what is the difference between those bits of the market and what can we learn from that? So that's something I'd like to get into that.
I think that's a good observation then. Yeah. So Tim, we can use examples from specific ones, but we want to generalize them, and people see how that then affects their sector. Yeah, good point.
And Tim, that's a very good point, and sort of leads me back to that thing about what's a legacy, or the sort of the resource or asset that you create on the back of it would be that shareable resource of more generic value with some good examples from particular sectors. That's very shareable then, isn't it? We will be publishing it afterwards, and it does create something for people to come to and learn from, as a sort of a bit like the blog post. What's the product? What are the 5 takeaways that we think everybody needs to know from this session? Maybe if we think in those terms, then the specifics of what we learned from the higher education sector or the finance sector can then be applied to other sectors. That's broadly how we'll see it, I think, anyway. So
okay,
cool.
So I'm conscious of time, but I think my action from this is to go away, just put together a few more concrete thoughts around this and share that with the group here. Richard, I'll speak to you later in the week. Shall I put this to you, Catherine, you, Mark, if any stuff that you want to review? Yeah,
that would be great. Thank you. We're also, it sounds like we're going to be catching up with Cassandra as well, so we can obviously make sure that she stays in that loop, or her or someone from the Microsoft side. But I don't think it was inappropriate for her to be involved, actually, from what she said, but she obviously wasn't quite clear. So we'll probably have another little round of checking in on who might turn up from Microsoft.
Yeah. My view is that, Microsoft and accessibility, there's a lot to kind of introduce about what Microsoft is doing in the space, and a lot for Microsoft to be, if you like, proud about. But then we're getting into some sort of nuances of Microsoft in terms of some of the Office products and what they're doing for people, and the composition technology. That sounded to me like an area that she may not be as competent about.
No, I think you're probably right, and I think that's why she was just wondering which of those ends of the spectrum she was going to be required to talk to. So
okay,
but yeah, so if you have some sort of second draft to circulate, we can obviously catch up with Cassandra about that. There will be somebody from Microsoft, because they're keen to be involved. It may just be that she's got a bit of digging around to do to find someone who can answer the sorts of questions you come up with. So
but we've got
I'm sure we can find some good stuff for Microsoft to be talking about, because so many bits of information come from the tools that they produce, and they've done some accessibility stuff. So it's an easy gig, I think, to talk about what the things that are built into Microsoft products that make it easier for people to produce accessible information, that's one of the things we can talk about, along with maybe some of the sort of transactional documents that come from organisations like financial services and health and so on, and then the publishing side of things, access to education and so on. So I think it's good. We'll know who our panel is, and we'll have good things for them to cover. And I wanted to ask, how are registrations going, and how's that looking from the Ability Net side?
We've got. Yeah, we're happy. The shift to online is such a new world for us, Richard. I don't know whether you've been involved in any yet, but we've got the same number of people registered as we had for the physical event last year already, which is great. We think we can get lots more, but we don't quite know whether that's going to happen. We're up to about 300, and that's what we had last year. So we've set ourselves a notional target of 500. We're circulating codes and tickets. If there's anybody you think we're not reaching, it'd be lovely to hear what ideas you've got about what we can put out there. We're more interested in bums on seats at the moment than we are in making everybody pay full price, because we want to get people through the door. It's this thing about having an infinitely sized room suddenly changes your perspective on what you're trying to do. So if there are people you think we could be reaching, drop me a line and I can get back out.
I was saying to Tim, I think I'm giving 8 conference presentations in the next 2 weeks. I think a lot of the events that were in the spring and the summer that got postponed and pushed to the autumn are happening in the autumn, and all the events that are happening in the autumn are happening in the autumn. So it's a pretty crowded space. So one big one that I'm doing in well, it's supposedly in Colorado, but it's all around the world. What they're finding is that, of course, people can dip in and out. It's your comment earlier, Mark, about people aren't there at the event and therefore wandering into sessions. They can easily just go, I won't bother logging into that. I'll go and do something else. So we'll have to keep an open mind about, how many turn up to individual sessions. And
I think so.
We have to give them a reason to bother to turn up, because they might go for only the specific ones that are really bang on the money for their own particular role or interest. So,
that's very true. And I think, I'm very conscious as well that we've got a fairly full 3-day agenda. I'm not sure I would set it up that way again, which looks like a physical event. And it's a little bit of a needle in a haystack in some cases, looking at content to try and find it. So that I was also in my comment about the blog post and the assets that you create afterwards. I think there's as much value in capturing something that people find useful and we can feed out to particular people in particular ways. And seeing that as much of a result of the event as the, literally number of people who turned up and debated and discussed. If we've got a particular audience in mind that we want to reach, then at least we can go and look for those after the event with what we've pulled together. That's certainly what we're doing in a few of the stuff from Ability Net's point of view.
Yeah.
So,
and the other thing I would say that might make us feel a bit better as well is there have been so many webinars with people doing presentations over the summer since kind of April time. Some of the most successful sessions I've been involved in recently have been discussion sessions.
Yeah.
Really oh, good. It's not another load of slides being sent at me. There's a discussion happening.
Yeah, so I'm glad you said that.
To what extent can we get a bit of interaction with the audience, or a bit of interaction amongst our panel, to make it easier on the ear than another kind of scripted kind of session. So yeah,
I agree. That's helpful, and I think we might have mentioned that when we spoke originally, Tim. I think the reason that somebody will be there live is because they're actually listening to somebody they want to have a chat with and talk to and ask questions of. So if we can make that focus very narrow to begin with, then if people are in the room, they'll ask all sorts of other questions. But getting them in the door, the first one will be, I want to hear what these people are talking, got to say about this question. I've got the same question myself. It's a good driver to sort of open the door, people turn up, and then the subsequent debate is driven by the people in the room, isn't it? So if we get that question framed, I think that's the one that will jump out on the agenda and get people signed up, live, so they can be in it.
It would be nice to think that we're reflecting people live with the kind of responses that we're giving, so long as it's within a little bit of a structure. But that is a nice idea, to make sure that we're recognizing people and we're recognizing their contribution to the session. Yeah.
So can we run a poll or two?
Well, I was thinking that myself. Is that a technological possibility?
I believe
Well,
we're in a
it
meeting,
is.
aren't we?
Well, it depends. It's either a meeting or on the main stage, Mark. As in the a Teams Live event.
Okay.
So we need to.
I thought this was a meeting. Sorry, I'd lost track. I'd lost not necessarily that. Yeah, I mean, I think it feels like a meeting given all the things that we're saying.
Yeah.
I did think one of the things about the rehearsal is that there's a technical point to this. Tim, having inadvertently ended up in the chair, we will give you tech support to make this happen. It's in the same format as the meeting that we're in now. In that case,
right?
And we need to be able to pin people to the screen, and it's a discussion forum. It's a bit like joining in with a Teams meeting is the simplest way of saying it. So the corralling of the resources and making sure everybody's able to hear things is a different task. When we're on the main stage, it will be managed in a way that it's broadcast, and the only interaction is through chat. So all you can do is type questions. So there is a question there about which of the two formats would be more useful or relevant to the audience. I've got a feeling this is a meetings one, and a question along the lines of what we're doing at the same time is Sightless Combat's doing his demo of gaming, isn't he? That's at this time. So that's the sort of thing that's happening as well. In the same format, he's using a Teams meeting to show you how he plays games despite being sightless. So this is a forum, a networking event, a chance to come in and talk to people who want to talk about accessible formats and the future and what documents will look like in 10 years' time. Okay. And therefore it's a meeting, it's a group session. It's not a broadcast of our four experts the rest of the world. So that's what I thought, Catherine, was why this would be a meeting.
Yeah, no, I did think that, but we hadn't finalised the formats 100%. So I just wanted to check. Yeah, so that's fine. And Tim,
well, they were saying, I think we just need to check in on the polls tool. We did ask Amanda about that, but we need to check in about polls.
Yeah.
That definitely, given the conversation we're having, we want to have that sort of interactive. Come in and join in, and here's our question, and what's your answer? And I've got 3 or 4 people here who think they've got the answer. Has anybody got anything else to say? Managing that sort of interaction through the Q&A, or people putting their hand up, or whatever it is.
Okay, so I think the answer is we'll look at that, Richard, and I will think about what would be good for polling.
Yeah, and I think it's a good idea to have things like that as much as possible. So if we can make that happen, we will. So.
Okay.
Cool. Great.
I thank you so much for scheduling this session, just to make me realise that I hadn't done any work on it. I really appreciate that.
That's okay. That's what we're here for, Tim. I've also popped a note in the comments about Duff. So I've been in contact with him while you guys have been on. He couldn't make the call today, so we've recorded it and we'll share it with him. And I suggested that maybe you and he have a chat at some point just to talk through content.
That is fine. I will reach out to Duff and make sure that he's fully briefed. I'll get my act together first, and then I can give him a more sensible briefing.
Awesome.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Richard.
Cheers. Thanks, Richard.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheerio. Bye.